have three wonderful groups of people here. Ellie is a group of one from Wild Path, and then Alex and Wyn Miller. And then this down in the corner here, we have Amy and Aaron Bishop and Harvey and Bonita. And I'm going to let everyone else take it away from here. Wyn and Alex, would you like to start by introducing yourselves?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Wyn, and I have some photos to share, but Alex, my dad, if you want to say hello as well.
Hi, folks.
So I'm going to try sharing my screen. You guys let me know if you can see it.
Looks good.
Looks good.
Yeah. Do you want to put it in the slideshow mode?
Yes.
The present mode? Okay.
Yeah. So we are talking to you from East Tennessee. My dad is traveling today, so he may leave a little bit early, but we are representing Lick Skillet Farm. We are a century farm. Over there with the big nose on the left is my grandpa. You can see whether or not he's my maternal or paternal one based on my dad. That's my daddy's third generation. I'm fourth, and we now have a fifth as well. Over on the left is a map of most of our contiguous farmland. We manage around 1,000 acres, and most of that is cattle pasture. We like to think of ourselves as environmental cattle farmers, but that's so odd because most of the climate savvy friends that I hang out with, when they remember I'm a cattle farmer, they kind of have to go, oh, and could there be anything worse? And I have to say, yeah, we used to farm tobacco. So that's my grandpa on the left and my mom on the right, and one of my brothers up top. That's me in the winter, and my grandpa again with the nose. Child labor provided me the stage for all of my character development and also my land ethic and also all of my precious family memories. During the 90s, we moved away from tobacco and towards cattle farming. So my dad really honed in on our genetics. And my mom really pushed for better soil and pasture management. Teach Your Cows to Eat Weeds and Kick the Hay Habit were really big influences on us, those two books, if you know them. That's my mom there on the front, ATV. So we are regenerative grazers now. We also produce non-ruminants. So our pork and poultry operations are soy and corn free, and we try to provide as much diverse fresh pasture as we can year round. Our ruminants are 100% grain free, and we basically market everything locally, which is really, really cool. My parents are both, Alex and Shannon, they're both very active on the farm on an everyday basis. As for me, I went off and had an environmental career for a while. I came back because I wanted to be closer to family, and I was struck with the conundrum of, I'm an environmentalist who's heir to a cattle farm, and it didn't feel right to just walk away from that. So with the very strong support of my mom and dad, we are trying to push cattle farming in the direction that we think it needs to go. So here I am in one of our native fields with my mom. I also started a silvopasture program. And tomorrow I'll be speaking about how we keep our very, very curious and frisky cattle herd off of our trees with energized planter tubes. We use what we call a multiple enterprise owner. So that allows guys like this to start farming without having to buy tractors. They each are heavily invested in, just based on their pay model, in their own enterprise. So we do cattle, hogs, sheep, poultry, direct marketing, and then also environmental services. And that's gone more or less to plan. It is more complicated than, it sounds maybe, and we'd be happy to share more about that. These are some of the family and what I call our extended farm family, our farmers and their families. And this is really, it's these people and stressing out over them and their livelihoods. And knowing that my family and our interaction and our success, really makes an impact on their lives. That's what kind of keeps me up at night and why I wanted to talk about this topic. So we have the big climate smart ag grants, but there's no grant funding for, counseling and mediation. But we all know that it's the people running our farms that is also very important to, future of America's farmlands, not just the financial and the technical assistance as well. And so I think at least the best way I know to work through those problems is to talk about them. And that's what brings me here today. So I'm really happy to get to share. And I guess, how do I unpause? Stop share. Okay.
There you go. Thank you so much, Wyn. Alex, you're welcome to add anything to that if you'd like, but that was a darn good introduction.
I thought so too. Let's get into the meat of it and hear from other folks.
Sure. Ellie, would you like to go next?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm Elle Sullivan. I am one member of the Wild Path Collective. We are farming Lily Springs Farm in Osceola, Wisconsin. And so we're a member self-directed nonprofit, and sort of the values that drive us were an intergenerational, multicultural, and interfaith community. And we steward the land that we're on as a commons, with a focus on creating access to land specifically for Black, Indigenous, people of culture and color, women, queer and trans folks, poor folks, anyone who's been systemically, who's had their relationship to land systemically oppressed or damaged. And so we have been stewarding this land as the Wild Path Collective since 2022, but I have actually been at Lily Springs since 2018, and I'll get into more of the details of the transfer. But it was a privately owned farm, agritourism and educational space for years before Wild Path came on. So it's been cool to be part of. I feel like I get to sort of hold a little bit of both sides of the, I wasn't the previous landowner, but I worked for her. And now I've joined the collective. So have been part of sort of the transition since before. And now once we've been officially granted the deed to the land, and we're in our second year of operation. And I think that's all I'll share for now. I'll pass it off to Amy and Aaron and Harvey and Benita.
One thing I do want to add is Allie's one of our mentors and has been mentoring with Swin Institute for, I think this is your third season, maybe fourth?
Something like that. Yeah.
Something like that. Like that. I will make it up there one of these days. All right. So then the list we have Harvey Benson, Bonita Utterbach, and Aaron and Amy Bishop. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves too?
Okay, I can introduce myself, Harvey Benson, Harvey from Harmony, southeast corner of Minnesota, and I'm still living in the house I was born in 92 years ago. Of course, a lot of people say I never had any ambition, but that's their problem. So this was a century farm. So it was a traditional farm. Oh my goodness! Anyway. It was a traditional farm. We started off like everybody else. You had your cattle, you had your hogs, you had your chickens, and even had pigeons for a while when I was really young. And as time went on, things dropped away first. I guess it was the milking that dropped away, and then maybe hogs, and then chickens, then for that pigeons, and the last thing to go, I suppose, was the cattle. And then it ended up being just a grain farm. And I left here when I was about 35 years old, and it's been rented out for all these years just a few years ago, and the renter was not taking care of things the way I wanted. I tried to influence him by introducing him to land stewardship, is telling him to go to these different workshops at his farm programs, but he never did. And so it was time for a change. And so that's when so we had to start thinking. I thought, no problem here. Here's Bonita. I'll leave everything to her. That's my plan. What did you say to that?
I said it was not a plan.
Okay, so then I had to start thinking and went to some land stewardship programs and about land transfer. It seemed like most of those were transferring to their children, and that was their big problem, whereas mine was not. So anyway, I started thinking a little more seriously than what can I do. So I started investigating, looking around what can be done, and then I've always been lucky all my life. So one of the best lucks I've had is when Amy and Aaron came into the picture. Wow, here are people that know how to take care of the land. If I give it to them or transfer it to them, I bet they'll do a good job. And it's only been a few years now, a couple, 3 years, and already there have been big changes. So we certainly did the right thing. That's enough for me.
And I'm just changing the slide over to some of the photos of what's happening now too. So
for the background, this is a 160-acre farm. Harvey was born in the farmhouse just up the hill. We're currently down in the corn crib built in the 50s, and this is what Aaron and I are converting to our home. We don't yet have farm equipment, so 160 acres was not something we ever thought we would be able to afford, and Harvey's made that possible, and we can talk more about that later. As Harvey mentioned, he had no children and had no heirs to pass the farm on to, so it was really a process of thinking through what good options that felt good to his values would be. And we were kind of family friends, so we knew each other, and there's more that we can go into about how those conversations started. But at this point, this farm has been in, I suppose, constant cropping for almost 150 years. And so we actually just set aside 80 acres, and that has just been sown to tall grass prairie. And we're going to be doing a little bit of oak savanna as well, and looking at doing a wetland restoration on a corner that used to and is still designated wetland, but the stream has been tiled out essentially. So that's something that we're looking at as well. And the rest of the farm that is officially tillable is currently in alfalfa, because that was something that was very important to Harvey, but needed to have cover on at least half of the farm. And when it was rented for row cropping in recent years, they really pushed to have that be no-till. So they did make some progress with the neighbor renter. And we're hoping that this alfalfa can transition to pasture, because Harvey's done a very good job of keeping the fencing up on this 160. So that's been great.
Yep, so my background is in geology. My family owns and operates an Niagara cave just south of here by only about a mile. And so very convenient for driving to work every day. But my family, we've known Harvey for probably just over a decade or so. And after college, I had gotten my geology degree. I was very focused on soil health and karst geology, which of course is the geology of southeastern Minnesota with caves and sinkholes and whatnot. So I was looking for a piece of land separately before Amy came along. How large, but like what Amy said, anything that is of even 40 or 60 acres is fairly unaffordable without going into fairly crippling debt. And so Amy and I got together, I guess, and then we got married. And then we were in conversation with Harvey and Benita for numerous years. And are we talking about how we
probably should hold off on
are we
that.
hold off on that for now, or?
Yeah, you're gonna give it all away. Harvey,
Well,
who's your lovely person sitting next to you?
That would be me.
Yes.
I'm Benita Ackerbaki. I showed up about 15 years ago, and so I'm an extra in this scene.
You're no extra now.
But really grateful for the time to at this time of life to be able to listen for understanding and to encourage the young ones toward a better future.
Thank you so much. And I was going to just cut you off, Erin, before you gave away all of the other questions I was going to ask. So for the audience, this is a collection of people that have come into my life in different times, and I thought really exemplified how complicated land transfer can be. I think Harvey mentioned for a second that's like, oh, you'll just hand it to your children. It's not that easy, even in cases of intergenerations in family, as Wyn will explain. It's not that straightforward. So there's a lot of people that are honestly getting too old to farm in the way that they used to. And so these conversations are incredibly difficult to have, but they're incredibly necessary in order for the stewardship of the land to continue in a way that's regenerative and responsible. So you all represent that to me. And I want to thank you so much for being here. So that being said, how did you start the conversation around land transfer? And I want to pose this question to Wyn and Alex first. Oh, I'll also invite you all panelists to be unmuted if you have anything that you'd like to add to the discussion too.
The way, in my memory of the way we started the conversation is as two things were getting older. The farm itself was getting older. We were approaching 100 years old. And Shannon and I, Shannon's my wife, we were also getting older and realizing that we weren't going to be around forever. So we just had a real honest statement that, hey, someday we're going to be gone and somebody else is going to be running the farm. Let's talk about it. But that led to some pretty quick decisions about the strategy of the farm. And those questions, those issues about the strategy of the farm, what we were going to try to do with it, led to much deeper conversations. So it was really starting to get into it that the conversations really got deeper and richer. Very early on, we realized that for the farm to be sustainable, we had to have a big strategic change. Instead of producing commodity cattle and selling them into commodity channels, there's just no money to be made in that for small producers. And we decided we had to go to direct to consumers. If we're going to go direct to consumers and develop a website to do all that, we had to have a variety of different products to sell through it because nobody wanted to go to a different website for every single product they're getting. That just doesn't make any sense for anybody. So we had to go direct to consumers and bring in a new generation of farmers. And we went looking for young people who were interested in becoming farmers, but couldn't afford the land and the equipment and the infrastructure to get in farming themselves. And we put them into business. And that was the enterprise model that Wyn mentioned before. Once we did that, and we had a group of young people that were working on the farm and families that we were supporting and building up around the farm, then the second generation in the conversation got real interested that, whoa, wait a minute, it's now not just a matter of taking care of ourselves and taking care of the land. It's also taking care of these families that we've attracted to the farm. And that deepened the conversation in a hurry. And at that point, Wyn could probably pick up the story and tell it from her perspective better than I can.
Well, yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, I'm the worrying about keeping our guys employed certainly is a stressor. But I would add something to in this, like, how did the conversation come up? I want to add a couple things. One, I should say, I don't think I mentioned this before, but just to clarify, we're at a very different point in our land transfer than the other two scenarios that are represented here, which I think is more common for family farms. I don't own any land. There's three major landowners on the farm. My dad and mom, his brother, his aunt, and that land isn't typically transferred until those people die. So I'm waiting for mom and dad to croak before I have to start being the one to sign the papers. However, there's still this like very long period, like many decades of where we're working together to try and figure out what that's going to look like, how we meet their needs now, my needs later, and my needs also now, and everybody else's needs that work on the farm, and how legally that works out. So we have not only the land itself to worry about, but also the business and all the finances of the business and the running of the business. So just to say that period, at least for a family transfer, and I don't know what this experience was like so much for my dad, although I remember him living through it, but it was decades where he was working with his dad as that like leadership and mantle and a responsibility was being, shifted over. One other thing I want to mention that my dad didn't mention is what I remember is him coming to all of us about, okay, he's got 4 kids. There's 8 kids in our generation, 8 cousins. And of those, I'm the only one that's kind of like been magnetized or else had it foisted on me, you know, this kind of farm responsibility thing. I don't know how that wound up, but initially he came to all 4 of his offspring and said, you know, do you want to work on the farm? And this is where we were still selling commodity cattle, and we were like, no, we grew up farming cattle, it's boring, now let's do something else or whatever. And he was worried, he didn't want to have to sell, this is how I remember it, he didn't want to sell the farm outside, so he came up with 2 ideas. One was the idea of a trust, so that we'd be incentivized to keep our to not sell off, to not divide and sell off the land. And then he also devised this idea of the multi-enterprise model. The multi-enterprise model has more or less worked out pretty well for us now. I think actually better than any of us would have thought. The trust idea really didn't work out for us, and that took some time of figuring out. It took several years of us figuring out. And so that is still a question mark for us, is what does the legal land ownership look like going forward? That's a question mark for us. So this is really still in progress.
Thank you so much. Elle, did you want to talk about how this process kind of began? I know like your situation, as you said, is different because you're neither the landowner or the sole land receiver. But if you have anything to add, welcome you.
Yeah, I'll preface this by saying that I don't think you could replicate my situation if you tried. It's very strange, circuitous, serendipitous. Very, I mean, to call back to Roske's keynote, like mycorrhizal, mycelial, you know, those networks had been growing for years and years. And then a couple of things kind of happened to be like the rainstorms that brought the mushrooms to fruit. So the previous landowner, Nina Utney, had held the land for decades, 30 plus years. And it's about 90 acres. It kind of horseshoes around a little lake. And she had originally set it up as just sort of, you know, kind of passive space that had an old farmhouse on it. So she would take her kids out. It was like cabin land, an hour from the cities. But in kind of like the mid 2000s, she just started sort of pulling the right people into the room to kind of activate the land a little bit more and do some work to heal the neglected pasture and the neglected red pine plantation, the monoculture, the legacies of monoculture that were still on the land. That effort created Lily Springs Farm. And so Lily Springs had been in operation since like the early 2010s. A variety of different perennial enterprises, a lot of stuff oriented around just like testing out different agroforestry practices and using it as sort of a demonstration space. Part of that being we were sort of a remote learning location for a college program based out of the Twin Cities, where students focusing on environmental justice and sustainability would come out to the farm a few times a semester and learn some permaculture principles, hang out with our goats, and yeah, just kind of have some like hands in the dirt learning experience. And that was involved with that project, Louis Alamayu, who's been a long time they're an activist and poet in the Twin Cities. Just relationship with Nina, the landowner. And in 2020, in the wake of the pandemic and then the murder of George Floyd, Nina started out how to teach his ability to serve as an accessible relationship space for people. And Baba Lewis was mentoring a group of young folks who were looking. Okay.
Yeah, Ellie, you're cutting. Yeah, you're cutting out a little bit.
Okay. Am I back?
You're back. You're good.
Okay. Alas, the farm internet just won't cooperate. So yeah, in the summer of 2020, Baba Lewis started bringing out some folks that he was mentoring. They were looking for land. They were searching kind of all over the St. Croix River Valley. They were planning to crowdfund to be able to purchase land, and nothing was really coming to fruition. And so just through that relationship, Lewis saying like, "Oh, let's just go drive around the St. Croix River Valley and let's stop at this farm that I know." Those conversations emerged. There was a lot of synchronicity there, and by the late fall, early winter of 2020, we were kind of taking our first tentative steps into conversations around, would it make sense for Nina to transfer the land to this emerging collective, the collective of folks that eventually became known as Wild Path. And Nina has a few sons, none of whom were really interested in fully taking on the mantle of owning the farm. But yeah, so this group of young people held together with this just like very serendipitous connection with the elder Lewis. That's where the conversation started. I can hold off on kind of getting into like the meat of it. But yeah, certainly not something that like you could go out and decide to replicate, but maybe later on I can pull on some threads that I think are really useful and transferable to other people's situations.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. I think you touched on what will hopefully be a theme of, I think will be a theme of this conversation. It's been a theme of Land for Me is relationships. So for the Canton, is it Canton, Minnesota? Is that the town that you're closest to, Amy, Aaron, Harvey, Bonita? Harmony. Okay. Ooh, my apologies. Will the Harmony team like to tell their story of how did this start?
Yeah. So Harvey already mentioned that they'd been attending some land stewardship project, land transition sort of workshops to start thinking about this and looking into whether it would just be a donation to Pheasants Forever or what the model would look like. And I, before Aaron, had been looking for land for years, writing letters to, the owners of vacant farm places with small acreages and kind of striking out for probably close to 6 years. A few who would, respond, and maybe there'd be something that might be a possibility, but be out of my price range, or no, they weren't ready, and belonged to several children, and just all of the complications of transitions. And Aaron mentioned that he was independently kind of thinking about land as well. So once we were married, or maybe even shortly before, we're looking for land jointly, but we were never looking for something 160 acres. And so we hadn't even considered Harvey's, and we didn't think that Harvey was probably considering us either. And so it happened that the four of us were kayaking, and we don't have many lakes in this area because, again, sinkholes, caves, we don't hold water well. We've got streams and disappearing streams. But there was a kind of artificially dammed lake to the west of here. And so we'd gone kayaking, and Harvey was speeding ahead in the kayak. So I figured I better stick with him. So we were up front and just having our own conversation, and Bonita and Aaron were in a tandem kayak and having a conversation as well. And turns out we were having conversations along the same topic, which was Harvey's land and what he was going to do with it. And, would this be too much of a burden for someone? And should I parcel it out and split it up so it's something that would work for people? And so I guess we all kind of have slightly different memories of the conversations that were going on, but it was the same theme. And if anyone wants to add to that.
And I was being pushy because 15 years ago, dear Harvey was a happy-go-lucky, free spirit, having taken care of his will, that he would live a robust, engaged life until the last half second, and then somebody would sell the juicy 160 acres of farm from his grandpa to his mom to Harvey, and that big bunch of money would be split up percentages to dear charities, and that would be it. So he was doing just fine. Gradually, then he got to learn a little bit about LSP. And meanwhile, took his chainsaw over to my place to help cut down some trees with more confidence than skill, I might mention. And by felling a hung up tree that clipped in his back and cracked a vertebra, he was in St. Mary's in Rochester, wincing in agony. And his words were, "Call my attorney, call my lawyer to change my will so Bonita will take care of everything." I had known 2 probate processes. I didn't feel like I had any more time, years, to spend on that also. So I was being the pushy one, needing Harvey to get his plan made so that I wouldn't be expected to take care of it. And that was, we were looking for possibilities. And that was part of the impetus that Aaron and Amy's modest search and Harvey's grand plan to have the land taken care of was a start of a connection.
I don't know. I suppose when I started thinking about things too, like you could transfer to different organizations, Pheasants Forever or whatever. But what they normally do, they just sell it out to the highest bidder, and things get even worse, I think. And I suppose I didn't come to these ideas, but a lot of people haven't until the last 10, 20 years of what should be done to the land. And I've been reading a lot and hearing a lot. And in every farm magazine these days, you hear about and read about good farming practices, how to take care of the land. So that got me to thinking that just a normal sale to some organization, that won't work. So we have to try something else. And by the way, Bonita's still pushing and I'm still resisting. That's it.
Well, I'm grateful for Bonita and grateful for pushing, because I'm sure this is a story that a lot of you can relate to, but land for land seekers can seem impossible, and land for people that are transitioning, it can seem like a huge burden. That's a big reason of why land ends up at auction. And I will not speak to the practices of people that pay top dollar for land, but there are other options. A lot of times it goes into monoculture, and to be able to install that, again, that stewardship in the land and in the practice and the responsibility takes time and takes a plan. So again, grateful for you, Bonita, for being pushy on all of this. So thank you so much for talking through that. Let's talk about the actual transition. I'm sure there's things that you weren't expecting when you originally started off in this process. Are there anything that comes to mind, stories or maybe even themes that you felt like were difficult to approach? And I want to also caution that this is for the benefit of the audience here, to know what they're getting into and maybe how to expect the unexpected things that came out of your situation. So please feel free to share what you'd like.
We can jump in. I think for some of us, and probably many of us, it's hard to think about mortality, right? So I think for Harvey to think about what happens when I'm gone is difficult. And even for us being friends with Harvey and Benita, thinking about, okay, at some point, Harvey will be gone. So it's just a topic that's pretty tender and has to be approached carefully.
Yeah, I don't, Wendy, you tell me if I'm wrong on this, but I don't think we have an issue with that. Wendy regularly reminds me that I'll be worm food before too long. And she also points out that because of that, my thinking about the farm is very different from her thinking about the farm. And this echoes my own relationship with my father. When I was about Wyn's age, my father and I had a pretty rough conversation about his interest in cutting some trees, big mature oaks on the farm. And I was just dead set opposed to it. I said, let me pay you the worth of the trees just to save the trees. And went on. And things got ugly. And it occurs to me that today, the same conversation's going on. I'm on the other side of it. I'm looking at some big oaks on the farm and say, we're really ought to be cutting those trees. And of course, Wendy look at them and say, are you crazy? We're not going to cut those trees. And I think that what you see is very much a function of where you sit. And one generation sits in a very different place than the other. And so for us, the difficult conversation isn't about mortality. It's, okay, given the reality of mortality, how does that bias your thinking and your time frame? And that continues to be an issue we have to work through all the time.
I think I partially agree with you, but I do, and I was actually glancing at the chat, and I know there were some folks in there who are interested in that topic as well, that this confronting mortality. First of all, I've never said anything about worms eating you. But I do point out a lot. We do have in our family, I had one grandfather that was the youngest of 7, one that was the youngest of 15. My grandmother was the oldest of 11, and we also raise livestock for a living. So, we kind of are professionals at being able to grasp mortality, I guess. So we do laugh about it a lot, but I think you kind of laugh about it, but underneath there is still something that none of us can get away from, the truth that is got to be the scariest thing possible, is our own mortality. And so I think maybe it shows up differently, but I do remind my dad, what I think I remind him of a lot is the difference in kind of pace and schedule and time frame of where he is. He's kind of like, all right, let's wrap it up. Let's get this legacy down while I'm still going, and I have no interest in legacy. That's just not something that really appeals to me. To me, it's more of like a lifestyle choice. And this is something that I don't think it's cut and dry, that in our later years, we're more concerned with legacy, and in the earlier years, we're more concerned with lifestyle. I think that it is a general pattern, though, that I've noticed, is that, there's a lot of folks in their 20s or 30s or 40s who are wanting to, live off the land or raise their kids on the land or something like that. And that's what's drawing them to farming. And, at later years, it's like, okay, I'm a well, I don't know what it's like, right? Because I haven't reached that time in my life yet. But I think it's got to be like, what I'm reflecting on my ancestors, on what they did and how I'm going to continue that. I'm going, what was my impact on my community? What was my impact on my family? And so that difference I'm just kind of echoing what my dad said of where you are in life. It not only changes what your goals are and what your needs are, but also, like, for us, it's changed our sense of like time. Like, my dad's in much more of a rush. He's much more willing to take risks because he wants to do stuff, right? Because he's like, how much longer have I got? Let's do all this stuff, And I'm like, whoa. I just see what you're setting up for me is like 40 more years of effort. It's a lot of work. And so I think talking through those things, getting getting right with yourself, with what your real needs are, understanding what is your own need for lifestyle, what is your own need for legacy. I refer to my dad's legacy as his immortality project. That's a term that you can look up, and I think the literature on that is interesting. But I think getting to the bottom of those things kind of gets you into the realm of the stuff that you talk about with your therapist. And those are the things that are going to be critical to your success of a successful transfer. Because if you just go for logistics first and for kind of surface things first, like when my parents thought up the idea of a trust, it's like, okay, let's divide the farm equally between 4 people. Well, it turned out that those 4 people, they all had different values and needs and orientations. And so we didn't actually need something that was equal. We needed, something that was equivalent or something like that, right? But it was the underlying personalities that really made the legal and formal organization work or not work. And I think that's getting to those inherent emotional and social aspects of it is important. And I do want to say, I know for some families, it's much harder to talk about mortality. I know in our own community, there are some families that will not talk about mortality at all. And frankly, I don't have a lot of good advice for that, but maybe that's something we could address later on for those who are facing those issues.
Yeah, I'm gonna pop in with a question that's really relevant to that. And you did just say that you had no advice on this, but I'm gonna throw it to the rest of the panel. But Sabina in the chat, hi Sabina, says, do you have any panelists that have experience with elders who are unwilling to have the conversations necessary to create a plan for land transfer that doesn't potentially involve losing part of the land due to the expenses of transfer when there's no clear plan before death, or more importantly, disability? Oh, I think it's just relationship building. It's hard to have that conversation with the stranger,
I might need to hear the question one more time, but I did want to, at some point during today's talk, I wanted to mention the idea of a lifetime estate and how that's used. And I think Benita was aware of that too. That doesn't deal with the concern of bringing up mortality, but it does deal with the concern of maintaining someone's ability to live on a property. So I don't know if now's a good time to bring that up, or if anyone else wanted to hear that question again. I
think that's a great time. It kind of borders on kind of a legal discussion, but very relevant to the question posed. So if you'd like to talk more about that.
Well, I'll keep my description really brief, because honestly, I'm the last person in the world that should talk about legalities of land ownership. I don't know much about this, but I do know that in our and Dad, please correct me, because you probably know more about this than I do. But there's something called a lifetime estate is what we call it. That might just be kind of an informal term and not really the legal term. It might be called different things in other places, but it's essentially where an elder person cannot work the land any longer, and frankly might want to sell the land for the income, but they want to stay on the house. And so it's a legal structure that allows them to basically live and use the land. It's usually like, a little acre around the house or whatever, that they continue to use, even though they've sold the house and the entire property to begin with, but they continue to use it until they pass away. I think there's probably different ways of writing it. It might be that they have a sibling they could give it to, and it's based on their timeline, but it's tied to a certain person's life. So that might be a tool that might help in some scenarios.
Excellent.
Why don't you talk? Amy and Aaron will talk the legal part because they are detailed people. I was thinking the general part when you said about failing, when people aren't so sharp anymore, and you don't want to struggle you don't want to straggle into the adult taking advantage of vulnerable adults. Scary boundary. Around here, we've got resources for folks who are caregivers with dementia, of how to make their lives as good as can be without becoming agitated, and also the legal steps, the legal templates to get things in order while they're alive. Those resources are available. I don't have the links available, but around here we've got that kind of support also. And now Erin and Amy with the legal part of being able to stay in the property for the rest of your life, even though someone else may technically own it.
Are you wanting to be to that stage, or are we still on some other questions?
No, go ahead. I'll make sure that if Ellie wants to chime in after you guys, that they have a chance for it.
So legal structure. We looked at some different options too. We're fortunate to all have a mutual friend who happens to be our local small town lawyer. So we all felt like we could trust him and that he wouldn't be, working on behalf of one party versus the other, that he would be looking out for everyone's best interest. And I think we've all come into this also wanting to make sure it's in everyone's best interest. So that's important, obviously. And we thought about different possibilities, lifetime estate. We thought about some of the possibilities of things transferring to Benita. She can maybe talk a little bit about why she was not as comfortable with that. Do you want to bring that up with your...
I wanted Harvey's land to be met with his values. If I had it, and whenever I died, if I didn't have a good enough plan, that could go to my descendants who might think that it was worth just turning into a pile of pennies. So I wanted me to stay out of it.
So, right, Benita and Harvey aren't married, and with Harvey with no children, no heirs, they really wanted to have that done cleanly and clearly, I guess we can say. So what we eventually settled on with the help of Greg in town was that Harvey was going to sell it to us, essentially making this very possible. Harvey's rule was no interest, no loan, no crippling debt, basically. And so we've been beyond fortunate. And when you say you could never duplicate that scenario, it's probably true in our case as well. It's the relationships and what you've built already. I could write letters all day long for 6 years, and then this just happened because we were in the right place at the right time with the right connections, I guess. So we feel very fortunate. So we do own the land now. And the legal structure is, I think, pretty simple, but essentially both Harvey and Benita have what's called a right of re-entry. So if we don't live up to the expectations and what is written down for our stewardship of this land, they could take it back at any time. Harvey could take it back. After Harvey, Benita can take it back. And we're all comfortable with that. And that's something that seemed to work out. Having sold the land, I guess, also probably protects clawback of the property. If Harvey were to need assisted care, there's something with state statute and 5 years if you've sold in recent years. So Harvey did want to move on that front in selling the land. And then Harvey didn't have to deal with property taxes and insurance and those things. Those things are all on us now, which is perfectly fine. And of course, Harvey was always going to be staying in the farmhouse as long as he possibly can. It's just up the hill here. And so I guess, for the state or for the lawyer to have it in writing, well, Harvey rents the farmhouse and you've got to put a value on it. So he rents the farmhouse for $1. That's just something that we did. So kind of like a lifetime estate, but just an agreement among all of us and with a separate small legal document at the attorney's office. So if anyone wants to jump in and add to that, I think that's probably pretty close to.
Yeah, I think the one major thing that is helping us now is the fact that we are not in any crippling debt. So we feel we can be creative in what we're doing with the land. We don't have to feel like, well, we have to get as much money as we can off of it so that way we can pay off of the debt, because that might not be the best. That might not be the best for the land, is getting the most money from it. And so that was very key in our position, and that might not be, that's very rarely the case. We're first generation farming now, and then you don't hear that too often. You hear third, fourth, fifth, sixth, etc., but not too many first, and it's daunting. But what makes it most possible is that one point of no crippling debt. And so, like what Amy said, with the right of re-entry, if at any time either of them feel that we are not living up to what we agreed to, etc., they can take it back. And again, everyone is very comfortable with that.
During all this legal maneuvering or what had to be done, I was always so impressed. They were so worried that they might be taking advantage of me. My goodness gracious, I never had that in my mind at all, but they were so kind about this. And this shows the kind of folks they are.
Thank you guys so much. And then we'll give the floor to Ellie. Ellie, would you like to talk some on the last subject and then on the legal subject after?
Yeah. Before I jump into, so to the point of, when you've got the question about and having conversations with elders who are resistant to that planning process. In our situation, we had about, 12 to 18 months where we were just in legal conversations, negotiations, and discussions, between the collective and Nina and her team, about all sorts of things, conservation easements, kind of how we would receive the transfer of all of these different enterprises that were going on at Lily Springs. And one of the things that came up was, whether or not Nina and her family would have continued access to the land after, coming there for 30 plus years. And initially, her request was, or we were talking around ideas of her having reserved rights, whether that be towards sort of just like general access for recreational use on the land, walking and camping, or if that meant maybe a parcel of land set aside where she would build a cabin so that she could come and stay kind of independently of the other living structures on the property. And it was actually her sons who really encouraged her to release that, to just like fully close her chapter of kind of owning and being on the land and fully transfer it over to Wild Path Collective. I think her sons really understood that like our work as the collective really needed to be free of, any previous landowner being still on the property. And that actually that left open the opportunity for her and her kids to come back organically and build relationship with the collective in the future if they choose to. But I think what was really critical about that was that Nina had intergenerational support in, her kids saying, we don't need you to hold any of this for us. Like all of us, they're scattered across not just the country, but the world. And they, all of her kids really encouraged her to, kind of helped hold her hand through that like grief process. What you said, Wyn, about there being like elements of therapy in these conversations. Totally true. Like there was a lot of technical discussions that got kind of set to the side while we processed feelings on all sides from everyone participating. But yeah, having Nina's family kind of supporting her through the process of closing her chapter on the land was really critical. I don't think we could have, or I think it would have been potentially really damaging to the relationships if we had to like put our foot down as a collective and say, it really doesn't work for us for you to retain any of the parcels here. So yeah, I think that intergenerational community is important in multiple ways. And this was one moment where yeah, it really like helped ease some of those fears of scarcity.
Thank you, Ellie. I know it's you're as you mentioned before too. You're still in the process of really getting everything settled. This is really new and really fresh. But I do remember at a talk, one of the talks in planning this panel, we were talking about finding the right legal structure meant finding the right lawyer. And I think a lot of these conversations and a lot of the suggestions here are going to be hard to replicate, and it just takes not settling on a person that tells you no as far as the legal ones go. So could you talk about that at all?
Yeah. So our process going through all this legal stuff really required the collective to get clear on our foundational values first, because especially being a collective oriented toward regenerating land relationship for Black and Indigenous folks, for queer folks, people who have been people against whom legal systems and structures and processes have been used to like prevent them from land access or to break their land access. It was really important that we engaged with these systems in a way that didn't feel like we were replicating, colonial harms. And so it took us a long time to kind of find the right people to help guide those conversations, people who were well-versed enough in all of the legal, technical world, but who also could take our wild, decolonization, pulling from lots of different Indigenous practices. They could receive all of that language and all of those visions, and a couple of those folks really were critical in helping us translate that into legally sound verbiage. So we settled on working with David Harper from Permaculture Living Lands Trust. And he especially was really key in helping us figure out ideas around cultural easements. We were in the process of getting the land transferred to the collective. We went through, trying to find a land trust that could hold conservation easements. But in that process, our collective members had to grapple with the fact that the way that those conservation easements are typically written in the tradition of English common law, they see land as property. They see land as just like sort of a compilation of resources. And there's not a lot of flexibility for cultural use, for seeing land as like a being with whom to have relationship. And so, yeah, by working with David Harper, we were able to actually include language in all of these deed transfers and in our easements kind of package that allow for a lot of expansive, like future adaptability around Indigenous access to the land, different structures that would be appropriate for cultural use, and that really helped us feel confident in those legal settings and conversations, that we had someone who was able to translate for us these really important cultural values that, for the most part, have been left out of a lot of a lot of laws surrounding land use, and finding lawyers that could advise us on how to write bylaws that kind of helped us shape a 501c3 into this more like commons-based collective. Finding people who could advise us on insurance policies that cover like really wide-ranging different uses of the land and activities and gatherings. I know there's questions in the chat of like, but what is that lawyer's title, or how do you find those people? A lot of searching and a lot of trial and error. One of the biggest things that we learned in this process was we would continually remind ourselves, don't get caught up in the urgency, just move at the pace of relationship. And so anytime that there was the tension in the relationships, or we're like, these people are just not hearing us, that was a cue to us to really slow down, and either do a lot of kind of going into those sort of therapy breakouts of having different facilitative processes to try and understand each other better, or recognizing that we weren't working with the right people, and we needed to ask Nina's team to give us a few months to find someone who could support us better. And credit to Nina's team, we moved slow on all of that. And at times there was tension in those different paradigms of, get her done versus, better slow better slow and right than fast. And everyone feels a little bit off. But yeah, moving at the pace of relationship really helped us stay tuned in with our feelings of is this person aligned with our values, or are we just, another job that they're trying to get contracts out for?
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that is sound advice for everyone too, of just, this is a long, complicated project in a lot of ways. It involves emotions, it involves legal, it involves a lot of money. And those are all things that should be taken at the pace of relationship, moving at the speed of relationship. I love that. Well, great. That kind of that does it for the questions that we had previously discussed. Are you all ready for questions from the audience? I'll take that as yes. So the first question I want to ask, it seems like a couple of people say, yeah, me too, is Kathleen, my coworker here. In cases where the family member or current farmer is heavily invested in industrial ag, the example, recently built some massive hog barns and is therefore not very open to pivoting to regenerative ag practices that his children are interested in, how would you recommend starting the conversation around land transfer? So this is something that Wyn, you touched on a little bit in making decisions with Alex. Would you like to field this one first?
Sure. I may not have the best answer, but I was looking at this question a minute ago, and I also have to say my dad just lost his signal, and he has to drive up to Johnson City anyway, so he's just going to take on off. So he said thanks for having him. So on this question, I think there's my kind of first thought is oh man, that really sucks. Yeah. Oh man, if my dad had invested a ton of money in a direction that I didn't want to go, it's wait, no, that's happened a lot. And it's kind of okay. I mean, first of all, if you didn't like the hog barns, first things first, you need to come to peace with that. If you wish that money had been spent a different way, what's happened has happened. So don't let the frustration over that. And I apologize. I get when I talk about this stuff, I get very unsolicited advice. So I'm sorry if I come across as
unsolicited advice though.
All right. Okay. So don't waste any energy being annoyed at something that somebody's already done and that they can't undo. You're not going to get rid of that hog barn. Might want to spend some creative time about like what is some ways we could adapt it and use it differently, you know, in the future or something. But in regards to getting someone to like, if they're kind of, so we do have, my parents are great because for me, they're great. They're very open to, you know, my ideas and new ideas. And, but we do have a lot of folks in our community who have this exact same problem where the younger people are like, I don't really want to do that. And 20 years ago, I would have said the same thing. It's just my mom and dad have changed. So what strikes me is there's kind of three major routes you could look at. One is a positive motivator for him. So if he's interested, for instance, if he responds to the idea of legacy, if he is close to his family, if he's close to his grandchildren, find something positive that can pull him towards. I'll use this example as a positive motivator that I mentioned in some chat earlier today, just randomly off the top of my head. But like the folks that we typically hire, they always laugh because my mom drives a Prius and they're always like, man, before I worked here, I thought y'all were so lame with your Priuses and stuff. And so we typically don't have like environmentally minded people who we're hiring. However, one of the tricks that I found, there's tons of things that we try to do to get their buy-in, and ultimately they're able to see that our economics and our environment are really, you know, meshed on this farm. And so they do come around after a few years of working here. But for instance, one positive motivator is our cattle herdsman loves hunting with his son. He loves fox squirrels. And he needs there to be as much pasture as possible because that's how he makes a living. But I'm planting trees and I connected the trees that I was planting to the habitat for the fox squirrel, right? And that's a positive motivator for him to be like, oh, well, I have to put up with these trees anyway. Why don't I see them as something positive instead of something negative? So you could look at positive motivators that, you know, don't hit, if he's like really got the hog barn and you, especially if it's an issue that you fought about in the past, let it go, let him know that you accept him and love him regardless, you know, and then look for ways that are growing to really like mean something to him, whether it's legacy, whether it's grandchildren, whether it's, you know, him getting to whatever kinds of things that he likes. There's also the negative motivator, which is to find something about that conventional farming or whatever type of farming it is you don't want to do that he doesn't enjoy, right? So for instance, if there's a really annoying aspect. So for instance, one example of that on our farm is hay season was a huge deal. My entire life growing up, it's just like all spring. It just, life just sucks because hay is really, really stressful and the machines are always broken. And so as soon as we got the opportunity to not have to do that, we went in a different direction. So see if there's some way that you can save him some annoyance. And the third thing is if neither of those things work to manipulate his behavior, which we're all trying to do with our family members all the time, right? We're all trying to manipulate each other. But you can also just manipulate yourself and just go, this isn't ideal. You know, do I want to wait until I get to have a say in the way that things are done? Or do I want to get the hell out of here and do something else? You know, is this worth waiting for? And so managing that on the inside of like just kind of realizing, like sucking it up. Like there are a lot of people who just want to do things a certain way until the way they die. And if that's the case, then you got to figure out how you're going to relate to that.
I think that's really solid advice. Harmony crew or Ellie, would either of you like to chime in for that? It's not really the situation there. So Wyn, thanks for speaking to that. I'm going to ask these questions for people in the audience that have asked them in the chat. They're going to be a little out of order because I want to make sure I kind of get to the pithier ones for this group. Tony asks, are there programs similar to SILT, which for those in Iowa will know that as a Sustainable Iowa Land Trust, which connect beginning farmers to landowners who want to hand their farms off to individuals who would steward the land sustainably? And agree to keep the original farmers involved on the land. But the big question here is, does anyone have suggestions for a beginning farmer to forge these relationships organically? So there's kind of two parts to the question. And I think this question also goes into the idea of easements. So I guess this would be a question, one for the landholders, which on this call would be Harvey and Bonita, but why you consider doing Pheasants Forever, but not a land trust. So what kind of pushed you towards that decision? And then for the land seekers or the land receivers in this situation, what is your suggestion to forge these relationships organically? So yeah, I guess I'm gonna take a step back and try to be less confusing. But Harvey, Bonita, what did you think about easements? And Wyn and Ellie, this question will go to you too. Ellie, you've already kind of commented on cultural easements of the land, but sustainability easements are pretty big in this circle of folks. Did you consider sustainability easements?
We were. Don't be fooled. This took us a hearty 6 years to go from I'm not old enough to think about this, to the solemn comment when we were driving back from the last class of land stewardship transition, when I was gushing gratitude that Harvey was willing to do this. And after a long silence, his saying, I want to die in my house. It was one thing to talk about piles of money going off on percentages. But when you talk about somebody else and the day that we signed the papers at the attorney's office, and he came home and he said, this is the first time I'm coming to this land and I don't own it. I'm a renter. Those were memorable. As far as I forgot that. I almost remember the question, but don't worry about it. As far as how do we get connected, if we're going to recommend to anybody else, and we have recommended to other people, we recommend the Connecting Through the Land Stewardship Project newsletter. They've got people searching for land and people searching for people to use their land. So those, and I believe that other organizations like Practical Farmers also have those kind of networkings. We can start with the organizations and the local word of mouth. Even though a person might be considered a little bit odd, the locals will spread the word that you're looking for something. And that's also helpful. To get an attorney who specifically went to school to be an ag attorney, we lucked out. But there must be other ones out in the woods if they can have enough people to have a class for attorneys to be ag attorneys. But that was a specific qualification that made a big difference for a creative resolution of Harvey's situation.
To be clear, too, our attorney also said that my professor taught this once, and he told us, you'll never use this in real life. And that's the system we went with, that right of reentry method. So, yes, he's an ag attorney, but he apparently was told not to expect to use it. But it exists, and it's certainly something that I hope more people are able to work with. I think there was a question about building relationships, and I think that is the number one thing people can do. And I guess we don't have a TV or anything, but if I would say turn off the TV and go meet people, go have discussions, go deepen and create new relationships with people, because that is the most important thing.
I'll second that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I can comment in terms of people finding folks. Well, first, I just want to say, is it not absolutely crazy that you guys started discussing this on kayaks? I love this story. And from my experience, and this may not really be, I don't know if this is good advice or not, but from my experience, I also think there's something called farmland. This is not for finding attorneys, I guess, but finding farmers, finding operators and whatnot. Yeah, I think we need a lot better. We really need like a Tinder, but for farmers or something, maybe not quite Tinder, but I don't know what the right app version is for like farmers. And so we need to make it easier for people to like get to know each other, right? Because it took you all already know each other, but it took getting on kayaks to make the magic happen or to have those conversations. And so it seems to me that like serendipity plays a lot of role. And also just locality and like geography. And so for us, we have met a lot of people from around the country that want to come work for us. But honestly, the ones that are best are the ones who want to live here first. And I got to say, for folks moving in, so in East Tennessee is like, I think Tennessee is like the top third in the nation for growth in rural areas. At farmers markets, like 2/3 of the people who are there are from like out of state. It's just crazy what influx of people we have. So there's a lot of new people wanting to come out of cities and buy farms. And honestly, in my community, and everybody might laugh at this, but in my community, if you want to know something, you need to go to church. Like, you don't have to go to church, but if you go to church, they will, like Benita said, they will tell everybody everything that you said while you were there. Everybody in the community will know. And so that is really an important word of mouth in a lot of these smaller communities and farming communities. And it's a great way to meet people. And even if you don't need to find land, and even if you don't plan to go every Sunday and get saved, like just showing up at Christmas or at Easter or whenever, or whatever the local, faith is, I think starting to be a part of that is a great way to just get to know your community and let yourself, be less of a stranger. And also, if you're just renting and looking for a place to buy or something, that's just a great place to do word of mouth.
Yeah. Community, definitely. That's funny. I was having a conversation with a friend earlier about like where do you go when you need community in small towns, and even if you're not religious, like church can still be the way. And as a younger person looking for, or the bar, thank you, Carol, in the comments. However you find community, and getting the word out that you're looking for land. I actually just found farmland myself. So as a younger person looking, I just kept telling people that this is what I want. I put it out to the universe, but I also put it out to my networks of saying, this is what I want to do. And eventually, hopefully something will come up. I would say eventually something comes up, because I can see this conversation from like my personal vantage point of, there's all this land, and then there's a person from the other side saying, I have all this land, but I don't know where it's going to go after this. So my advice too, as just being involved in land access, is don't be afraid to ask. The worst that they can say is no. And what'll probably happen is they'll say, oh, I didn't think about that. But then have you in mind of like, oh, maybe I should start thinking about that. So sometimes it's just starting a conversation with folks in your community. Yeah, and let's see, we got about 10 minutes left. We have several questions. I think I asked the last one a little confusingly, and we could do probably a whole session on easements and farmland transfer. So we might not touch that one too much. But Carol is asking, Wyn, can you explain the structure a little more of your multi-enterprise? Do your employees own any of the land or the livestock, or are they paid staff? I think this is transference to other models of land access, such as a commons or a trust model.
Yeah, I would be really interested to hear how that works with Elle. I mean, I guess you guys own everything now on the land, but I don't know how the co-op works. For us, I can't speak for Seven Sons, which is where my dad got the idea, but for us, everyone is there's very few employees. Everyone is pretty much a contractor, which means they own their time and their tools. It's really important because we aren't big enough to pay. They're not employees. We can't afford to pay them benefits. So they're contractors, so they cannot own the assets. So we own the tractors, we own the land, we own the livestock, we own everything. They own their trucks and their tools and their own housing situation. There's a variety of different housing is a big deal for us. There's a variety of different housing situations on the farm. But yeah, that's how that works. So I should say, actually, the corporate, which is what we call Lick Skillet LLC or whatever it is, that technically owns all the land and assets on my mother and father's property. There's actually another business, Miller Family Farms, that is a cow-calf production business, which is jointly owned by my dad, his brother, and his sister. And that is operated on everyone's land together. And that produces calves, which are then sold to Lick Skillet, which are then finished and sold through the Lick Skillet brand anyway. But the important thing is the folks, the young guys that we hire on, and gals, actually, we're like half ladies now. They don't buy anything except for their trucks and their tools.
Wow. That's a really cool model. I put 7 Sons in the chat too. That's something you've mentioned a couple times as being a model that you've all been how to farm these like really large tracts of land that takes a ton of management and can support a ton of people. It just takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of communication in order to do that. Ellie, would you like to talk at all about how you mentioned that Wild Path is set up as a 501c3 currently?
Yeah, we one of the requirements request requirements in the process of getting the land transferred from the Utney family was that we do have some sort of formal structure, legally recognized structure for tax reasons. And so we debated between a few different things and landed on the 501c3 because we were able to, under this like title of 501c3, we've been able to really like create our own version of it that feels good. So we have a board of directors, and they are not the ones directing the management of the land or any of the operations. We have created just like a whole dictionary of made up words and terms for ourselves. Honestly, we have a lot of poets in the collective. So I'll use common language for it, but we have working groups that oversee the different sort of areas of operation, land stewardship, hospitality, and the respite programs that we run, the resources and finances working group. And so everything is all of the sort of assets of the land, the structures on the land, all of that is collectively owned by every member of the nonprofit. And then all of the right now, all of the profits from those various enterprises just go back into the pot. And we have a couple different people who are formally employed. A lot of us are still kind of in the like volunteer realm. Like Jen mentioned, we're very much, we have, sort of the legal stuff finalized, but we talk all the time about this being a 100-year vision. So we're very much in like sort of the listening and rooting stage. But yeah, so we have a vision to eventually, kind of similar to what you're talking about, Wyn, of sort of this multi-enterprise model. We call them path makers. But that would be folks running their own enterprises on the land, supported by the collective, shared use of all of these commonly shared assets, tractors and tools, and spaces. And then there's like a very flexible profit sharing model that would be highly adaptive to each individual person or enterprise happening on the land. So if you're running a veggie CSA, you could choose to put some of those profits back into the land, or maybe the resource that you're sharing in reciprocity is a certain number of shares of that CSA. There's a whole lot of details, and then also, those folks would be contributing labor toward collective projects on the land too. But yeah, our goal is to we think of them as layers of the spiral of membership in WildPath, that some folks are more in the sort of governance layer, making these larger decisions, facilitating the processes and systems. Some folks are more in the give me the task list and I'll show up on the 3 weekends a year that I can, and then everywhere in between. But really rooting in anyone who is affected by a decision that would be made has a say in that decision, where we have consent and consensus-based decision-making processes. Saying all of this, I know, sounds very wacky, and there's not a clear linear way to talk about it, because it's not clear linear work. And yeah, again, to call back to Ross Gay, care is inefficient, and doing this work with care, and all of our work is care. It's care for the land, it's care for culture, it's care for people who have been systemically removed from land or prevented from accessing land. All of that care, to do it honorably, means that we're doing it inefficiently. And so that's meant, a lot of workarounds where we're having to look at the models that exist and say that doesn't feel good. So we're gonna figure out some alternatives. We're gonna harken back to lots of research on it, various indigenous practices from around the world in terms of governance and collective decision making and all of that. And then, really expanding what we consider transactional resources into, beyond just sort of financial, that financial realm, and looking at, relationships as really valuable resources to us too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for calling Ross Gay in there a couple of times.
Whenever I can.
The most efficient thing that any of you could have done with your land is put it to auction. And I am so grateful for the people that don't take that path. And that leads me to, I just have one more question, and perhaps I can get all of you to be a bit concise for everyone's evening. This question comes from Chris Smith. What other resources do you wish for help in the transition? What resources do you wish that you had? And this will be from the landowner's perspective and the land receivers. What was missing? Oh. It looks like the Harmony Corner says nothing. No. Perhaps. Oh, go ahead, Benita.
We were fortunate. I feel that we were fortunate to have the shared intent.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So maybe a better question to lead us all out with was, what has been the thing that has stuck out to you? And it's okay to repeat what you've already said, but like what has stuck out to you is something that you learned in this process. That maybe you expected it, maybe you weren't, but what's your takeaway from this process of like, wow, I didn't know that walking into the process. I'll say for myself and just hearing this conversation, it's how important relationships can be in getting out of a transactional mindset. Yeah, and I will go back to RAKC too, of like when we talk about land as transaction, it's going to stay in transaction and it's not going to be cared for in the way that a land and transaction would be. So that's what I've been getting from a lot of you.
I think we're very, very lucky that we all knew each other. It isn't like transferring to a stranger. So that was a very big advantage, and it turned out well for all of us.
Mm. There's anyone else in the chat that like to also put if there's anything you've learned from this conversation, which I really hope you have, but I hope it was illuminating as well.
I think I was trying to come up with an answer to your previous question, Jen. What was missing? I've been to a few kind of farm legality things over the years, and these resources are probably out there somewhere, and I've just kind of skipped over them. But I would love for like our local FSA or NRCS office. I guess it wouldn't be NRCS, but whoever they are, your soil district or something, to just for all of the farms that they know about, just regularly offer like once a year high quality kind of coaching or training sessions on, these are some of your options. These are some of your legal options. These are some of the pros and cons. Here's someone you can ask who's done it, some sort of support like that, because frankly, farmers aren't lawyers. We can't spend our time figuring that out. And so we're having to figure it out as we go. And it's like wasting time and it takes so much emotion. Like, actually, I kind of made a joke about earlier that the government doesn't provide us like counselors and mediators, but now that I think about it, why not? It's like, it is a real thing, So yeah, I think some sort of realization of that part of it and that part of the support could be helpful.
Thanks for mentioning FSG, because I've been thinking the same for years, that they could be the connecting clearinghouse, because farmers have to report their acres every year. And I would think FSA knows the age of many of these farmers, and why couldn't they say, we've got this pool of beginning and aspiring farmers, and, have you thought about the next steps here in the next 5-10 years? So they could be such a good connection. So thanks for mentioning all the ways FSA, I'm sure they're doing plenty, but they could do.
Well, and I don't mean to bash FSA or NRCS or any of our government employees. They're all usually overworked and underpaid and all that. But and it is, now that I think about it, I mean, especially now with the power of the internet, it's probably possible to have sort of, and maybe FarmLink or the stewardship program or something is already doing this, but, to have a centralized capital investment on a type of platform where folks could, meet each other, have those conversations, meet people, find people with shared values, and also just look for other folks who are going through their same issues. I don't know whether or not I've tried to read through the questions, and I don't know whether or not we've adequately addressed everybody's, and I'm sorry if we haven't, but hopefully we've done our best.
This is a really big topic, and I think we did our best on it. We did not address every question, but some questions are a bit too big to to start talking about at 5:36 at the end of the day. I will mention Raya in the comments. I would encourage you to go to Wyn's talk tomorrow at noon Central Standard Time. I believe it's called Tree Tubes and Innovation, Fences, Tree Tubes and Innovation, because if there's one thing that tree farmers geek out about, rightfully so, is how to protect trees from your livestock, like this, this cow behind me. Silvopasture requires that sort of thing. So I want to wish you all a good night. But I would like everyone, if they'd like to go around to sign off. And just thank you so much for your time and sharing these really delicate conversations with this larger group.
Thanks, Jen, for having us. And I have not gone through the holistic management training. I saw your question. The answer to that is no, but I'm happy if you want to contact me or something. I'd be happy to speak more if you have more questions.
Thanks for letting us be a part of this.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jen.
Thank you, everybody. Hope you have a great night, and we'll see you all. 9 o'clock starts the last day of the PFG tomorrow, so hope to see you there. And again, please stay tuned for Wyn's section at 12 noon Central Standard Time. And yeah, we'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining us.